Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha television. You're watching The Big Picture with me, Frank Rausen Pereira. Rajya Sabha members had a busy day on Wednesday as key bills came up for passage today, the last day of the winter session. The winter session of Rajya Sabha was extended by a day as the government sought to pass a constitution amendment bill to provide quota for economically weaker sections of society. The Lok Sabha on Tuesday passed the 124th constitution amendment bill, which provides 10% reservation in education and government jobs for economically weak people across castes and religions, with virtually all parties supporting it despite the opposition calling the proposed law a pre-poll stunt of the Modi government. The bill, which the government said was historic and in the country's interest, was passed in the upper house on Wednesday after a marathon sitting. On this edition of The Big Picture, we will analyze the reservation bill. Joining me on the program today are V.K. Agnihotri, former Secretary General, Rajya Sabha and constitutional expert; Desh Ratan Nigam, senior advocate of the Supreme Court; and Satya Prakash, legal editor of the Tribune. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of The Big Picture. Mr. Agnihotri, I'd like to begin the program with you. What are your thoughts on 10% reservation for the economically weaker sections of society, and why do you believe that the Constitution needs to be amended for it?
Well, as has been the practice, if any reservation has to be provided across the country, then naturally the link or the lead has to be provided by the Constitution, as has been the practice earlier. Especially in this case, since it is a special provision over and above the reservation provided for SC, ST and OBC, then naturally this is a special category, so there has to be a provision in the Constitution.
All right. Let me bring in Desh Ratan Nigam into the picture. Now, is there a distinction between economic and social reservation?
Yes, there's a clear distinction. One is based on social status of a caste or the class OBCs. But here this is an economic criteria which is not based on caste. The other 50%, as I call it, it could be anybody, it could be based on any religion, it could be based on anything else. Some people say it is caste. Obviously, caste would be there under any circumstances. But the fact remains, at the end of the day, this 10% quota has been carved purely for the purposes of economically weaker sections, irrespective of the caste, creed or religion.
Let's assume that, this particular bill passes all hurdles, legal hurdles and so on and so forth, and actually, comes into being. Is it at some point in time going to interfere with the 50% reservation that we already have?
No, not at all. See, it is not touching the other 50%, which is of SC, STs and socially and educationally backward classes. This is being carved out of the other 50%, which do not have any kind of reservation. There it has been carved out only 10% of economically weaker sections. From those persons and people will be given reservation in public institutions and public employment.
All right. Satya Prakash, can amendments of this kind be challenged at any point in time?
Of course it can be challenged, and I can see the legal hurdles which it might face. One is the 50% ceiling ruled by the Supreme Court in the Mandal Commission case. It said reservation cannot exceed 50%. So primarily it will be tested on this judgment, whether any amendment can actually exceed that limit. One. And second is, if you remember, in 2006 there was Nagraj verdict, and there was some points relating to Nagraj verdict that were decided by the Supreme Court even last year, in September last year, and it was in the context of scheduled caste reservation. But the key points were whether you need quantifiable data to provide reservation for a particular section of the society. Second was whether adequacy of representation in services has to be taken into account or not. And third is efficiency of administration. So far as first point is concerned, backwardness, quantifiable data to determine backwardness, the Supreme Court last year relaxed it. it said no. You can go ahead with the reservation, but so far as other 2 points are concerned, the court did not say anything. It means the 2006 verdict of Nagaraj, it holds the field. And particularly efficiency in administration in Article 335, that is specifically in the context of SC/ST reservation, because originally the Constitution provided for reservation for only these two communities, scheduled castes and scheduled tribes, and thereafter it is using Article 16(4) government reservation, and then 15(5) was added, enabling it's an enabling provision, and the government was given power to make laws to provide for reservation in educational institutions. The only area of this law, there are 2-3 points. One is that it has been passed in haste because of the nature of polity. So it can happen in any government. But what I see is the government is testing waters to introduce reservation in private sector. If you read clause 6, I am saying proposed to be amended or proposed to be added to Article 15. So clause 6 proposed to be added to Article 16. It talks about private educational institutions as well. So what I understand is the government is testing waters. If this amendment is upheld by the Supreme Court, ultimately it means private sector can be touched and reservation can be extended to private sector. That's the only area where I don't think much discussion has taken place and not many people have gathered. The government is testing waters. If it's upheld by the Supreme Court, I'm sure this government or any other government will extend reservation given the demand from various quarters. Today also in the Lok Sabha, in the Rajya Sabha, many members, they talked about, particularly RJD member, talked about extending reservation to private sector. So this is the only area where the controversy is likely to arise.
Right. Yes, sir. You had to interject.
Let me answer a few of the points. Reservation already exists in private educational institutions, not in private employment. And this bill only talks about public employment and private institutions and public educational institutions which already exist for other reserve category. Whether aided or unaided, it's very clear. There are various like MIT University, Sharda University, these are private institutions and they do give reservation, and because it is condition precedent when you get a recognition or affiliation that this has to be given. And secondly, this all other challenges that were made, they were on the basis of caste, one, and secondly they were on the without changing amending the source from which the power was emanating. So this bill amends the source, which is Article 15(16), and relies also on Article 46, from where it says about economically backward classes. So from there the source has come. Once you amend the source, these will be taken care of. Secondly, Mandal Commission 50% reservation that had come, that was only for the purposes of caste.
Right. So there's a clear distinction here. Yeah.
And they have not disturbed that. What they are saying, it is from the general category itself, they have created and carved out this 10%, which does not hamper. And then they also talk of the preamble. While in debate in Lok Sabha, it clearly, Mr. Jaitley clearly said, this is based on the concept of social, economic and political justice and equality of opportunity, from where the economic criteria actually flows out.
All right. Right. Let me bring in Sanjay Singh, political editor of the First Post, into the picture now and welcome him on the debate as well. Sanjay Singh, lot has been spoken about reservation over the last couple of days. The debate has been going on for many decades now. My point being, shouldn't we start focusing on something else rather than reservations, maybe welfare schemes? We can look at scholarships, we can look at education loans, skill development assistance, and so on and so forth.
I think the argument that you are making, these arguments were also advanced when Mandal Commission recommendations were implemented, and also when there are talks about review of SC/ST reservation, which is there 22% and 27%, all totaling to 49.5%. And even in states where these might be higher, or in some states that might be lower. No state has lower, but of course the higher percentage is there. then when this particular thing is introduced and when you state or the central political leadership in the center wants to give that, when same argument did not hold for Mandal Commission or for SC/ST reservation, why same argument should hold for when you extend reservation for economically weaker sections, which encompasses all upper caste Hindus, Christians, Muslims, Baudd, Jews, Buddhists, and so on and so forth. Every other religion is covered. I think this was a long-standing demand. If you have to abolish all kind of caste-based reservations and make only economic criteria as reservation criteria. And then I think those the schemes that you talked about, I think those schemes are also running parallel to these schemes. And ultimately, you see that particular divide, in fact, as to if a political educational institution was built, say for instance IIT or AIMS or any other institution of repute that was built say 30 years ago, or any college in Delhi University or anywhere, suddenly you expand capacity. In fact, today Prime Minister was saying that 10% capacity will be enhanced in educational institutions. You enhance those capacity, but infrastructure in terms of staffing and in terms of plain brick and mortar facilities also do not exist for expanding those capacity. I think a concern that you are raising, those concerns are also valid, but I think this affirmative action, if at all that was given to OBCs and to SC/STs, this particular thing was also necessary.
Absolutely. All right, let me go across now to Mr. Agnihotri. You know, Mr. Agnihotri, a similar kind of an exercise was tried in the early 90s as well during the PV Narasimha Rao government, you know, but the Supreme Court held that it was invalid and cannot go ahead with it. What is different this time around?
The point is, Narasimha Rao's time, the basic issue was started with the Mandal Commission thing. So it was only in the affidavit filed by the government in support of the Mandal Commission that there was a mention about why not reservation for economically backward this thing. And ultimately the Supreme Court upheld the Mandal Commission reservation for backward classes. And as far as the economically backward this thing is concerned, it observed that just economic criteria is not adequate. But at the same time, it also said that, as has been mentioned by some of the panelists earlier, that is there any, deprivation or less representation of the economically backward people in the jobs and other places, then only if you have data, basically if you have data to prove they are not adequately represented, then only there will be a case, and 50% can also be exceeded in extraordinary circumstances.
Right. So is that extraordinary circumstance here now, and are we going to see the extension really? I know both Desh Ratan Nigam and Satya Prakash want to come in on this particular point that Mr. Agnihotri was making. First you, Desha, then I go to Satya Prakash.
See, the only difference that I see out here is the Narasimha Rao government tried to brought it through notification without making any constitutional amendments.
Yes.
So that is why it was struck down. Now that thing has been taken care of. Extraordinary circumstances are with respect to the poor people. And that is what the debate in the Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha is, panning out, that you cannot, compare equals with unequals, and therefore it has to be carved out. They have to be given that saman avsar, equality of opportunity. So that is where this criteria has come, which was earlier not there. It was being pushed through notification without, clearly stating the aims and objectives, relying on Mandal Commission, which was purely based on caste.
You're talking about equal opportunity. Where is that equal opportunity really going to come from when you have criteria like, annual income of 8 lakh rupees, you have 5-acre land holding, that covers pretty much 95% of the populace. With 10% of the reservation, how can you talk about
the fact
equal opportunity?
See, equal opportunity with respect to the people who are above 8 lakh and then who are this equal opportunities vis-a-vis the people who come with 8 lakh income ceiling. And therefore, you have a valid point that about 80-90% people may be covered, but we don't have that data right now. The census is of 2011. They are basing everything on 2011 census, and probably when a new census comes, those only you need to bring notification, then you don't need constitutional amendment. The latest data probably will come in 2021. So that process is going on, and that can be taken care of at the later stage. This is just a beginning.
All right. It's just a beginning is what you're suggesting, Satyaprakash?
Yeah, one part Mr. Nigam has already answered, that Narasimha Rao government's decision was rejected primarily because of the fact that it was an executive action without having constitutional basis. Now that the constitution is being amended, both Article 15 and 16 are being amended and new clauses are being added. So that part has already been addressed. But the real problem this would face, whether the extraordinary circumstance exists for the government to bring in this kind of amendment which can justify breaching the 50% ceiling. That's the only test it is supposed to pass if the law is challenged before the Supreme Court. Otherwise, constitutionally, the earlier attempts failed for attempts to provide for reservation for economically backward classes. It failed because Article 15 or 16, it doesn't talk about economic criteria. 15 talks about educational and social criteria, and 16 simply backward classes. So now that it's going to be changed, the only hurdle is 50% ceiling, and maybe some other points, say private institutions, if they come. I don't know private institutions. He is saying private institutions are already providing for reservation. The only thing I know is under RTE, schools are supposed to provide for reservation for economically weaker sections of the society. Otherwise, private educational institutions across India, particularly in the technical field, I don't think, unless it's a condition for something, sometimes sometimes for providing, suppose they are getting land on concessional rate or some other condition. If it's condition for recognition or for grant of something, then only. Otherwise, why would a private institution which is primarily being run for profit provide for reservation? It's generally, I don't think generally it's being provided.
Right. All right. Yes.
See, deemed universities are not providing, some of which are existing, because they have not yet been given the status of a university. Some of the private sector also who have not yet got recognition, but in the process of getting recognition, there the conditions come into play. Secondly, so far as breaching of the 50% ceiling is concerned, it is not at all touching that. That is purely based on caste. Right. So that is not being touched. This is coming out of the other 50%.
Absolutely. That's a point that you made earlier as well. There's a clear distinction between the two, and that's why you see why there should not be any legal hurdles. Sanjay Singh, you too wanted to come in on the debate. Go ahead.
I think the attempt made by Narasimha Rao was, I would call it a half-hearted attempt, because anybody sitting in government has a kind of all the resources to marshal out, to ask people to talk to legal experts, to talk to constitutional experts, and within and outside. So that was a half-hearted, purely political kind of attempt. And such attempts take place in various parts of the country by various states government, particularly when they are closer to elections. And knowing fully well that this is going to be struck down by the Supreme Court, and therefore that during that intervening period, that political purpose is served. I think that has been taken care of in this particular part. At least now it looks so, till such time that is challenged and court gives a ruling. The other part, I think, about the thing that you are talking about, 8 lakh thing, I think that is broadly the same what is applicable for creamy layer in OBCs. And there can be debate, of course, 8 lakh, 5-acre land holding and so on and so forth. That debate can go on. But also for providing various shops to farmer, when we talk about distress in agricultural sector, this 5-acre ceiling has been talked about. So those below 5 acre of land holding and various schemes for them. And I'm not sure whether for creamy layer this is 8,000, 8 lakh or 6 lakh. Of course, vast mass of people would come. I think the government's intention, perhaps, I don't know whether that much of debate took place when creamy layer for OBC were enhanced to this level. All in all, debate would go on. And for now, I think obviously the government has a political purpose. Any ruling party, any ruling establishment is led by political leaders of various political parties. They eye at elections. This Modi government, the BJP leadership out there is certainly eyeing at 2019 elections. That has been talked about today in Parliament. They may deny, but of course, there are political dividends or otherwise attached to that. And Modi government, I think, is trying to harvest that.
Absolutely. All right. Closing comments now from all my guests, starting first with you, Mr. Agnihotri. Is there a case now being made to try and put an end to caste-based reservations and have quota only for economic backwardness going forward?
Yes, this means this amounts to a first step towards moving there, because everybody is saying that let us get out of this caste and religion-based politics and let us look at real issues. Sabka saath, sabka vikas. I mean, that is the kind of approach from which this is flowing. But my problem is the implementation. We are talking about 8 lakhs, 5 acres. The Constitution does not mention this. It is a hypothetical issue that based on the creamy layer in respect of the OBCs, this criteria may be prescribed. But between the creamy layer and the poverty line, there is other criteria that could be fixed, and ultimately it will depend, because I think the central government cannot fix the criteria for all the states, as has happened in the case of SC, ST, OBC reservation also.
Right.
So states will be required to make the study and provide the data on the basis of which they will provide reservation. And of course, ultimately the question remains, where are the jobs?
All right. Okay. Those are valid points that you have raised. But Deshratan Nigam, now that the bill has been passed by Parliament, what happens next? When do we see the Constitution Amendment Bill 124th taking effect? Yes.
See, the moment it is passed by the Rajya Sabha, I think the way the alacrity and the speed of this government makes me believe that it will go this week before the president, the moment it is passed. And secondly, the other question that you had raised about economic criteria becoming the sole criteria, I don't think, given the political scenario in India, the caste-based reservations are going to go. And secondly, there could be a possibility, given the fact that the benefits of reservation has, in the case of SC, STs, has actually not reached the bottom level. This opens a larger debate whether the economic criteria should also be fixed in the SC, ST category.
Can we have two categories for reservations, Satyaprakash?
Yes, economic criteria
economic as well as social.
Within the caste-based reservation.
What he is suggesting is
economic criteria also.
What Mr. Nigam is suggesting is that there should be a creamy layer in the SC, ST reservation as well. There is a petition pending in the Supreme Court which demands that. But I would call this reservation the secular reservation, in the sense it cuts across all the socio and caste and religious divide. So it's applicable to all, and this is the way to go forward, because the reservation based on caste, it's very divisive. The kind of violence we have seen in the past, in the 90s and very recently. So this is the way to go forward. My suggestion would be, we can increase, supposing we fixed a particular ceiling of reservation, so we can keep on increasing this kind of reservation based on economic criteria, and every year or every 5 years we can reduce the reservations based on caste. Say SC, ST is whatever is the limit. So after 5 years it should be reduced by 1%, and this side you can keep on raising. Similarly, OBC reservation. So a time would come when the entire reservation system is based on economic criteria.
All right.
Because the historical injustice, it cannot go on for say 100 years or 200 years. There
Right.
has to be a time where it ends, and really secular criteria and based on economic criteria, that should be applicable across the board.
All right, let me get a concluding remark in now from Sanjay Singh. You know, Satya Prakash is suggesting that economic criteria for reservation is truly a secular way forward. But as a society, can we rise above caste-based politics and look at it from an economic point of view?
Satya Prakash added word secular. I think that's a nice formulation to this whole debate. Yes, indeed, one should, after all, the criteria for the term backward caste was not there. It was socially and economically, socially and educationally backward. And therefore, that was construed as caste, and that was read as caste. Time has come, of course, club these three and make it all encompassing a criteria for economically backward.
All right,
Why?
yeah.
Because the Constitution in Article 15 or 16, it does not use the word caste. It was this mistake was committed by the Supreme Court. For lack of any better criteria, they evolved caste as the basic criteria. And that is the problem, because it has become so divisive. So we need to get over it in due course, whatever time it might be.
And sooner the better. All right, on that note, then we'll call it a wrap on this edition of The Big Picture. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. That's it from me. See you again next time.